From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub. Well, there's Western Road outside the Black Horse Pub. How on earth the Black Lion got up there, I have no idea, but we got it right now. Good morning. This is Mirador Television, the television that enjoys cock-ups, and so do its viewers. So the first one of the day, and here we are ready to go. I'm Keith Hayes. This is the Black Lion. It is not, it is the Black Horse. Is looking out on Western Road, isn't it? Yes, it is. At a historic site where one of the king's men hid in a windmill, which is planted firmly on the green across the road, as you can see. There we are. We've got most of it right. Now we'll start to take a look at the real things. We hope. But first of all, it's always your favorite, is 14 degrees. It's going to hit in Lewis, but it's going to rain. Drizzle and a fresh breeze. Well, not too bad then. We're going to see sunshine breaking through the clouds until about, let's see, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock, we're going to get a bit more heavy rain, a bit heavier rain. A bit more heavy, a bit heavier rain. And that's going to last through until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and then we'll settle back to sporadic rain and some sunshine, right up until 5 o'clock, when it won't rain again, but we will get cloud taking us into the evening, and not until 7 o'clock will we see the return of the rain. So there you are. Last updated today at 7:01, and it is now 8:04. So that's only an hour old, and the moss on the trees is still there. So it's very accurate. We've got some joy for you today. At 9 o'clock, rather earlier than usual, we have John Henty coming along. It's always a barrel of fun. At 9:30, after he's barreled off to an important I think I think he's going to be interviewed by the BBC on a time that ABBA were played in Brighton. But it's something terribly important anyway, and he'll tell you about it before he takes off. And then we will have episode 3 of The Bloody Past of a Tiny Town. We had episodes 1 and 2, which I will play again at some stage, so that you can put everything into context. And then Harry is going to come over again from, because we had a short week, Harry is going to come over from Normandy and join Phil and the two of them will take the government apart, the opposition apart, the protest groups apart, and the walking wounded they will blast at. They're very good at that. So an interesting morning, to say the least. Oh, you got me in between time. Well, okay, okay, all right. Um, yes, I'm not absolutely sure that you won't get Tiny Town twice this morning. As I may play it at 8:30, 8:30, while we're waiting for John. Anyway, that is now we've taken a look at the weather. Never mind the weather, as long as we're together. Right, okay, the newspaper headlines. And the first one up this morning is The Guardian. And it says former Supreme Court judges add their voices to calls for an Israeli arms ban. Israel has upset just about everybody because aid workers were killed, and it says that was a mistake. But I think it's 7 lives lost is some mistake. Netanyahu is probably gone one step too far. He's a very tough man, hard-hearted. Perhaps some would say you need a leader like that in these turbulent times, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But he's also a man without a conscience, and that is dynamite, because he'll do one step further than others will do. And he is sanctioning attacks all over the place, leading to innocent lives being lost. So the paper says the UK government is breaching international law by continuing to arm Israel. A letter obtained by The Guardian and signed by more than 600 lawyers, academics, and retired judges says its signatories, including 3 former Supreme Court justices, calls for an end to weapons exports as a measure to prevent genocide in Gaza. He does seem intent upon wiping him out. He really does. Hang on for just a moment. I just want to. Yes, I just wanted to make sure that we were live. Sometimes these things slip out of their slot, and we're not aware. Right, down the page we go. As the eye, Gaza plunges into new aid crisis. The Israeli strike that killed 7 aid workers will plunge Gaza into a new aid crisis and invariably lead to more deaths and staff. Aid staff tell the newspaper. As the threat of famine draws ever nearer, some Gazans have resorted to eating animal feed to survive. The Metro. World's anger at aid convoy strike. Intolerable, it says. Intolerable, the Metro quotes Rishi Sunak as saying Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. After the fatal strike in Gaza, photographs of killed Britain's John Chapman, James Henderson, and James Kirby, who had been working as part of the World Central Kitchen security team, also featured. At the Times, Hunt forecast to lose his seat in a 1997-style Labour landslide. Oh dear. Well, what did you think of that? That was a pretty fair old sneeze, wasn't it? Yes, yes, ma'am. Is I do sneeze from time to time, and when I do, I make the most of it. Right, Hunt forecast to lose his seat in the 1997 style Labour landslide. It does seem that Rishi Sunak has been very, very laid back about thinking that the economy is going to pull back voters. It's not. It's bad government and bad governance. The only thing that he's got going for him is that Labour traditionally never ever lives up to its promises, and it never ever can do all the things that it says to replace a government. But nonetheless, it is promising more, and it gives a better image and appearance than the Tories, who really just hell bent on slitting one another's throats. And the electorate aren't going to put up with that, Mr. Sunak. No, sir. I would imagine you're going to bed at night worrying the hell now, because it's not turning, and the polls are showing a landslide. But the headline is a blood test to help spot Alzheimer's years earlier. Jeremy Hunt is one of 11 cabinet ministers forecast to lose his seat at the next general election in a 1997 style Tory wipeout. That comes from new polling figures done for the Times. Also leading the paper, a potentially game-changing NHS Alzheimer's trial system, which is striving to improve early diagnosis rates. Well, they are. They'll not cure it, but they'll catch it earlier. I don't understand. I wish that they had that for Parkinson's when I first caught it. And the clue that I got it, not a clue. As a matter of fact, I thought that I was overdosing from some Vicks because I'd had a bad cold and it was thing up my nostril. I hadn't at all. I developed a serious disease. Thank God for the doctor I had at the time. Very caring man, and not at all a fan of what's happening to our NHS surgeries now. It's just awful. Just awful. The thing is a total and utter mess. Time Jason Heath to rethink. Nobody's going to think any of the worse of you. The fact of the matter is, people are not beginning to think at all nicely and kindly of you the longer its present situation goes on. And when the culture keeps up. The smile is not good PR if it hides the fact is we don't really care less. It's working for us. The Sun, Rishi, I'll quit Euro Court. Right, okay. This is to do with Rwanda. The Sun leads on the government's Rwanda migrant plan and Sunak's pledge to leave the European Convention on Human Rights if it stops further deportation flights. It's Downing Street ambition to get the first flights to the East African nation should be off the ground before June. That's its aim. That's its what it's heading for. I'll just do this. If John comes in, he will want to sit down. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Something crashed. So they want it off the ground by June, and if the judges try to stop them, he says, I'll leave. He should have left anyway. people said at Brexit time. I mean, no wonder a number of people are saying, "Oh, do we do the right thing?" It's because we're in a hybrid. We're neither here nor there. It's like it was when we first joined. You can't buy a bent banana, but you can buy a pint of milk. I mean, uh, it's just ridiculous. And they call themselves conservatives. Daily Express, the Prime Minister. We will quit the Euro court if Rwanda flights are blocked. Oh, the same story. Sunak's ECHR comments also make the front page of the Express. Elsewhere on the front page, the father of James Kirby, one of those killed British workers in Gaza, is quoted as saying he's absolutely devastated at his son's death. The Daily Mail. MPs caught up in naked honey trap sexting. Wouldn't you know it? Serving minister among those feared to have been targeted by hostile state. The Daily Mail reports that at least a dozen MPs, their staff, and Westminster journalists have been targeted by suspected spear-pushing attacks. Spear-fishing attacks, I should read. That's reported by Politico. Some were sent flirtatious messages and nude photographs, the paper says. Ooh. The FT, gold record, global jitters reinforce the rally. So gold has gone up in value enormously. It's always a safe haven, gold. And because of the, not so much the turmoil in the Middle East and in Ukraine, but rather because of America's failure to curb inflation, people are rushing to put their money in gold, whether it will come out at the other end still with value. Google looks at launching a premium AI-powered search behind paywall, and Levy tries to raise Spurs game against richer rivals with a call for fresh capital. Let's see what that's all about. The Financial Times says Google is developing new paid-for premium search features powered by generative artificial intelligence, AI. The paper also reports a record surge in the price of gold due to persistently high US inflation and the state of conflict in the Middle East. The Daily Telegraph. Judges to look at soft terms for deprived offenders. According to the Daily Telegraph, the Sentencing Council has told judges to consider more lenient sentences for offenders from deprived or difficult backgrounds. Elsewhere, Defense Secretary Grant Shapps warns allies not to play Russian roulette with NATO funding. Right, let's see if the Daily Star can bring a smile to our face. Excalibur arrives, a huge quest to find King Arthur's lost sword. And that's amazing, because they should put that onto the front page, because a couple of weeks ago, I discovered they were rerunning Merlin, and I decided I would have a little look. I'm slowly, it's not the best acted thing in the world. It's not got the greatest storylines, but it somehow hooks you, and you become addicted. The Guardian leads with the call by hundreds of legal experts for an Israeli arms ban. The paper gives details of the 17-page letter sent to the Prime Minister. That's been backed by 600 lawyers and academics, including the former president of the Supreme Court, Lady Hale, and two other former justices. Lord Sumption and Lord Wilson have both backed it. The paper says Conservative Party sources believe Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron has pushed for the government to harden its approach to Israel that has been met with resistance from Number 10. Gaza plunges into new aid crisis, says the Eyes headline. The paper says aid agencies are warning that children in the territory are dying of malnutrition and being forced to eat animal feed to survive. The Metro also leads on the men in Gaza. Israel saying it is blocking humanitarian aid into Gaza, wholly unfounded. Well, there you go. There you go. That's what the news is about this morning, at least the front pages of the newspapers. Those on Fleet Street that deem things to be important, they don't always get it right either. Okie dokie. Well, as I think I'm going to... I'm not going to rant this morning. Yes, I am going to rant. I have been trying to get an appointment with my doctor for almost a month. Some may say, Keith, you just haven't been persistent. But bringing even the smallest service, television service, and the most basic, which I suppose is, takes quite a bit of time. And to sit on a phone to be told that you're 85th in a queue, and your waiting time is probably about 2.5 hours, is more than is reasonable. And that was happened when I've tried to phone. I went down to the surgery one lunchtime. Spoke to a charming girl. They're all very nice. And she said, well, I can't give you an appointment now, but why don't you come back at 8 o'clock in the morning? Now, I may have misheard, but I duly arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning, got somebody else to host this show, and I went in, but I didn't actually go in. I bumped into two receptionists going in, and they said, no, you can't get in until 8:30. At which point my frustration broke in a terribly polite way. I said, this isn't working, is it? To which one beamed, and not in a particularly friendly way, and said, well, the system is working in here. Now, that tells me that the NHS service in local surgeries, or at least in this local surgery, is that they are in denial. They don't believe that there's anything wrong with it. And it's making life easier for them. So that's all right then. They join train drivers who think it's okay to dump you at Hayward's Heath when you want to go to Lewis, so they can get the train in the right place for the morning. It's easy to look after yourself and to do what's required to make your life easier. But that's not what the whole system is about. The whole system is about looking after your patients, looking after your customers. And that's where the NHS is failing. It's not in the level of doctors. You get some poor ones, but you get some brilliant ones too. Overall, they seem to be fairly competent and know what they're doing and provide that sort of service. The trouble is that the system lets them down. And then these youngsters, these young doctors, get into the act and decide that they are going to go on strike. And people say, oh, well, yeah, they've come out of university with £30,000 worth of debt or 50,000 or whatever it is. Well, that's no excuse. They knew what they were doing. And undoubtedly, they made provision for it. Getting into the service and then saying, oh, dear, we can't afford it. We need to have our salaries raised is no way of going about things. And I would feel very insecure being in the hands of a doctor or a nurse or any medical staff who think that way. But the worst is in the local surgeries, where they are quite convinced that they've got the thing right. When in fact, I find it difficult to talk to anybody who is satisfied, even to my level of satisfaction. They are just simply not doing the job and not wanting to do the job. And so we're in a dreadful, dreadful state. Dreadful state. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. 2 years ago, a new service started. It's emergency care, which looks after elderly people. And I have been subject to them in the last 48 hours because my Parkinson's watched me get out of the shower on Sunday morning, all brightly scrubbed, ready to go to church because it's Easter Sunday, and wham, it pushed me back and I fell into the shower. Now, I've got one of these lifeline things, so I pushed, and while I was lying on the shower floor, I was able to shout through to the living room and say, help, 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 and told them what had happened. Hang on, they said, and came back within minutes to say, we phoned an ambulance, they're going to come, they will be on the way, but they will be 2 hours. And in fact, we're about 3/4 of an hour. They were very, very efficient. And when they got there, they did what I'd been waiting for over a month to get done. They gave me an ECG, they checked my heart, checked my blood pressure, they checked absolutely everything and showed me the results. And there wasn't too much wrong with me. Nobody knows why I collapsed this way, except we just say it's the Parkinson's. They said somebody will be in touch with you in the next few days to see how we can help stop you falling. Yeah, I said. Wow, the next day, I got a phone call. Bearing in mind that all this happened on Sunday, on the Monday, I got a phone call. And by lunchtime, I had got somebody there talking to me. And they did. They made an assessment. They spent 2 hours with me. An hour and 3/4 longer than I would get with the doctor. And they came to conclusions. And then checked them with me, had a chat with me, see whether they fitted in with the symptoms. And then they said, somebody else will be back tomorrow. And sure enough, somebody else was back tomorrow. Right at exactly when they said they would be. We had another chat. As a consequence, that very night, I got somebody in to make sure that I could make my own meals and so on and not fall over. That they talked about a long-term plan being in place, but until then, I get a carer every night. just for an hour, to make sure that I'm upright, that I've been fed, watered, that I'm in good fettle. It's not the Ritz, and it's not bad care either. And I am well looked after. That's a big difference. I've got somebody else coming today to look at another aspect. And it does look as if I'm going to get some sort of long-term care where they can do things for me that I can't do myself now. I don't like being like this. And because of my age and therefore my background, I don't like being a burden on the state. But if I'm going to spend most of my life on my back, if I don't get this care, I am grasping it with both hands. But they are hyper efficient, and they've got a system that works, whereas the surgeries have not. Surgery is a mixture of back rub and what did you say? Whatever it was that, that my carer has to offer. Why is it that one arm of the NHS can be so efficient and the other so inefficient? There's a complete and utter overhaul needed. And those people who are really imbued with NHS mentality sort of say, oh, no, that's never going to happen. And they're right. Mostly, it never does. Some of the people who undertake the old-fashioned, this is how to get how to get an appointment, how to get the attention you deserve and need. Well, it's about time that the doctors, who are good doctors, nobody's complaining about them. If they can't see you, or they don't see you, what's the point in having a good doctor? It's time that they actually realize that they are not administrators. It's like, I think it is Socrates or Plato or one of the Greek philosophers said, when a man becomes an expert in one thing, he immediately thinks he's an expert in everything else. Well, these doctors and the doctor's surgeries think that they are expert planners. They think that they are great administrators, when in fact they are crap. And they are only going to sully their own reputations because when the majority of people find that they've been treated badly, they'll take some sort of form of action. So that is the situation at the moment. So anyway, plenty of Henty at 9 o'clock. Harry and Phil at 10 o'clock. And in between, as I started to say, material from our video, our program, the bloody past of a tiny town. So plenty to come up for you. It is now 8:35. I think we could take a look at the bloody past episode 1B. That's not what we're looking for. We are looking for no. Let's see if we can take a long way around and find it. No, actually. No. That's where we are. There we are. Here we go. This is the bloody past of a tiny town, episode 3. Now we've played one episode a week so far. There are 8 episodes, so this is the 3rd week. Let's see if we can enjoy it.
He sat on the bank while the river still chattered onto him, a babbling procession of the best stories in the world. That was the excitement that Mole experienced in the story Wind in the Willows. And indeed, rivers large and small everywhere all have many stories to tell. The River Ouse that flows through Lewes is no different. In fact, for much of the town's history, it has played an important part. Today, the river carries nothing but pleasure craft. But for a long time, it was a busy, bustling port. About a mile upstream from here is the village of Hamsey. It sits on a triangle of land which splits the river as it curves down towards the town. Hamsey is barely a village today. A few houses with the 13th century church standing in splendid isolation. But Hamsey was a Saxon port in the pre-Norman era. Historians estimate that over 1,000 people lived here, populating a port that saw ships sail up the Ouse to trade goods. There is no doubt that the Normans had a bit to do with its demise. The area was handed over to a Norman lord. But the community was attacked by an enemy it couldn't stop. An army of rats, which disembarked from one of the visiting ships, went ashore and infected the village with bubonic plague. The Black Death. The disease devastated Hamsey. And while there is no historic evidence, legend has it that the residents barricaded themselves in to prevent unaffected people coming in and diseased people getting out. Eventually, they starved to death. Named after the black rats which carried the plague, the Black Death killed over half the population in Britain between 1348 and 1349. The survivors founded another village off Ham, the modern thriving village of Opham. The plague attacked Lewes several times over the following centuries, each time causing significant loss of life. So death continued to stalk Lewes, bringing tragedy to the high street in rather greater measure than other UK high streets. Hamsey gone, but Lewes as a port flourished. Ships and barges plied their trade up and down the Ouse, creating an exciting and bustling waterway. Many of these buildings, which stand on an extension of the high street in an area called Cliff, are built with old ship's timbers. Where Argos now stands was a sailor's pub called the Bear, built as a brewery in 1787, and it succumbed to the carelessness of revelry and burned down in 1918. This quiet domestic street, which runs for a short distance parallel to the Ouse, was the sailors' playground, and history relates that there were more than a dozen brothels successfully operating. Today, this street is known as Little Chelsea. Even the name makes it seem a nice place to live. The rather small abodes have found favour with many modern Louisians and are now favoured homes. And why not? They look good in a twee kind of way. And if you're not living in a former brothel, there are other historical backgrounds to raise the interest. All this talk of pubs and trading around town, it saps my energy. So I sometimes come to this little oasis. The Knott's Garden in Southover Park. A lovely little hideaway. Back to the High Street, or at least its extension into the cliff area of Lewes. So I've been wandering around here because Lewes is full of antique stores and models. As I mentioned, go inside some of these shops and you'll find that they're supported by old ship's timbers. Another reminder of the days when Lewes was a port. All this talk of water has made me thirsty. I made several mentions of the time Lewes had 63 pubs. As you would expect, among the 16 that are left, there are some with strong ties to the community. Over the road from the shops, held up by ship's timbers, is the Gardener's Arms. There seems to be a tradition in Lewes, although no one admits to it, of omitting the epithet pub or tavern. This pub is called by locals simply the Gardener's. And the Gardener's it was. The origins of this pub go back to when it was an ordinary house, owned by a gardener. Often, after work, he would invite other gardeners into his front room for a drink. Eventually, it made sense to formalize the ritual. So, it turned into a pub. The Gardener's is a true pub. Unusual now, it only serves pork pies and sausage rolls. Yet each year it's in the top tier of finalists for Pub of the Year. Magnificent. Back to the Street of 1,000 Brothels. Well, perhaps not 1,000, but a few anyway. There's a pub called the Snowdrop. Nice pub, they tell me. Interesting for its name and where it stands. This is the site of England's deadliest avalanche. Just after Christmas in 1836, heavy snow built up on the edge of the downs. There were 7 cottages here where the pub now stands. Despite warnings, the people living there went about their business, totally unconcerned about the snow. Then whoosh, down it came, demolishing 7 cottages and taking the lives of 8 people.
Time, gentlemen, please.
Not heard now that the admonishment of past landlords that it was time to quit drinking should have been heeded by the cottagers. A disaster both for the country and the town. A brief mention of one last hostelry, the John Harvey Tavern. Named after the founder of a local brewery, the one of 16 to survive to the modern day, Harvey's has been around since at least 1790. And an important inhabitant. Along with Mole and Ratty on the banks of the River Ouse. More on that later. For the moment, back to the bar. How I wish I'd lived in Lewes when it had 63 pubs. Bliss. You might think, from the pubs I've been into, that Lewes is a drinking town. The town constable in the late 1800s didn't think so. The town constable in 1890 didn't want it to be. Here are some notes from the High Constable of Lewes, a gentleman called John Holman, dated 1880. Sunday, the 10th of October, visited all the public houses during morning service. All in good order, except Lewis Arms, several there tippling in service time. Sunday the 17th of October, visited public houses, all in very good order, except the Lewis Arms. Again a second time, several persons in both parlour and taproom tippling at 11:30, time of divine service. Gave the landlord a caution. Sunday the 14th of November, visited public houses as usual, witnessed very great indecency in the person of George W. Several persons were tippling during divine service, and on our approach to do our duty, they were permitted to hide themselves upstairs in the pub. This was the third or fourth offence of the same kind. Wow, a bit different today. But beer is very close to the hearts of this Sussex town, because it's one of the main employers and industries. Earlier, I mentioned the John Harvey Tavern. John Harvey started his brewery on the banks of the River Ouse in 1790. He was one of the 16 that flourished here at one time. Now, with just the odd microbrewery popping up here and there, it's the only one. The brewery is close to the hearts of the community. The pubs it owns have in the main remained traditional, while its method of delivery has most definitely remained in the past. Miles Jenner is the chief brewer, and his range of beers reflects the activities of the local community. The dray that trots around town is a symbol of the tradition of the brewery, but also of the town. The beer maker turns out beers named after local events: Firecracker, Tom Paine, Bonfire Boy, and Lewes Castle. The name Harvey, synonymous with Lewes. You've been around, or the brewery has been around for quite a long time. Can you develop a little bit of the history for us?
Yes, the family came down, the Harvey family, from London. They were wine and spirit merchants at the end of the 18th century, and they started brewing in Lewes and on this site in the early 19th century.
I can stand next door to a man in a pub in Lewes, and he will swear that Harvey's tastes quite different to anything else, and he won't drink anything else. I mean, what's the secret of the product?
Any brewer's beer is really a derivative of his water and yeast strain. We never talk of water, we talk only of liquor, but a local water supply and the brewer's yeast strain, it gives his beer an individual character. You could take our recipes, exactly the same raw materials, go and brew at another brewery with their water and all their yeast and have a totally different brew at the end of it.
Talking of water, and you mentioned that the barges came up the Ouse. How important was that to the brewery in the past?
Well, I think it was very important. It was, a fundamental form of communication, and if you were bringing a fair few tons of barley upstream, then it was a very sensible way of delivering. But just as industry sent stuff out to the river, so the river sent stuff back to them, and it wasn't unusual to brew with river water around your feet. And the last big flood we had in 2000, we were 6 foot deep in river water. We got our product together very well. We had a good reputation. The brewery was re-equipped, and we were producing a beer which became very much identified with the local community and was dear to their hearts. The fact the building is actually known as Lewes Cathedral tells you something about the way that Harvey's is viewed in Lewes.
The brewery flourished, but Lewes as a port rapidly declined. The familiar barges that had plied the River Ouse in the early 19th century carried loads of clay to the town. But the clay was used to build the beds for railway lines, and the death knell for river traffic sounded. The ships had consigned themselves to history. The first train to run from Lewes was in 1846. Since then, the railway has become an important junction in the national network. Trains from Lewes station run to Brighton in the west, Hastings in the east, Newhaven Port in the south, and London in the north. There have been successes and failures. Other lines were axed over time, with one, the Bluebell Railway, preserved as a steam preservation project. Back to our tale of the High Street. Cliff High Street is an extension of the High Street ending at the base of the Downs. At the end of it is an ancient church, St. Thomas of Becket. The Black Death wasn't the only medieval disease to strike Lewes. Leprosy was rife. This infectious and unsightly blight is first recorded in Lewes in soldiers who took part in the Battle of Lewes. It seems that the monks of the priory tended leprous people in 2 hospitals. Of the larger hospital, St. Nicholas, little remains, but the smaller hospital of St. James also treated lepers. Bones of the hundreds who died in the Battle of Lewes showed that leprosy was widespread.
Don't wear this hat to look pretty, you know. There's a Sherlock gene in me somewhere that gets me into more trouble than enough. So I'm going to stick my head above the parapet and suggest that there's evidence of leprosy here long before the Normans paddled ashore at Hastings.
The church of St. Thomas of Becket in Cliff, that's the very far end of the High Street, up against the Downs, has a leper's slit. This was a channel built into the church wall, so that lepers could take Holy Communion without infecting the congregation. St. Thomas's is a very ancient church, with bits of it predating the Normans by quite a few years. The interesting thing about this slit is that it starts and ends inside the church itself. Additions were made to the church over the years, so it appears that the leper's slit was built into the original church, but encompassed within it as it was enlarged. Certainly leprosy entered Europe about the 4th century, but was only virulent in the 11th. But it seems that the disease was already in Lewes well before that. Anyway, the Cluniac Priory tended to lepers until a certain king's greed and love life shut the priory down. So leprosy can be added to the Black Death as a scourge of Lewes.
But let's shuck off the historic events of bloody Lewes and celebrate the river, the way that our friends in Wind in the Willows did, the lovable mole and his friend Gung-Ho Ratty.
Each summer, a raft race is held on the Ouse by the local round table. Teams from organisations, schools, businesses, and even groups of individuals construct weird and wonderful rafts and race each other from Lewes down to the sea at Newhaven. Not a very fair race. The crews bombard each other with flour and water bombs, water pistols, and any other old rubbish. Spectators add to the mayhem by pelting other missiles at the crews.
The first few hundred metres are quite torrid. because from the bridges here, people hurl flower bombs and eggs and all sorts of things at you, really. But when you get past Lewis, it's quite peaceful and serene down the river, and you've got the tide to help you along as well. Last year the theme was the Rio Olympics, so again it was quite open to interpretation. You could just take Brazilian culture or, of course, the Olympics. I actually took part last year. I duly sank in New Haven Harbour, unfortunately. But obviously we've put the proper safety provisions in place, and we were
Well, sorry, we had our first real technical glitch of the week. We'll try and
Greed and love life shut the priory down. So leprosy can be added to the Black Death as a scourge of Lewis.
But let's shuck off the historic events of Bloody Lewis and celebrate the river, the way that our friends in Wind in the Willows did, the lovable mole and his friend Gung-Ho Ratty.
Each summer, a raft race is held on the Ouse by the local round table. Teams from organisations, schools, businesses, and even groups of individuals construct weird and wonderful rafts and race each other from Lewis down to the sea at New Haven. Not a very fair race. The crews bombard each other with flour and water bombs, water pistols, and any other old rubbish. Spectators add to the mayhem by pelting other missiles at the crews.
the first few hundred meters are quite torrid, because from the bridges here, people hurl flower bombs and eggs and all sorts of things at you, really. But when you get past Lewis, it's quite peaceful and serene down the river, and you've got the tide to help you along as well. Last year the theme was the Rio Olympics, so again it was quite open to interpretation. You could just take Brazilian culture or, of course, the Olympics. I actually took part last year. I duly sank in New Haven Harbour, unfortunately. But obviously we've put the proper safety provisions in place, and we were fished out before we were swept out into the English Channel. There's been suggestions this year that there would be pirate rafts and people drinking rum and trying to board other people's boats, but we'll see how that happens. We're limited for safety reasons to 25 rafts. In the next number of weeks, we're going to have talks with all the safety bodies, and perhaps we may be allowed more, but obviously safety is our main priority. This year I've been absolutely inundated with applications. I think I've sent out over 100 application forms.
Wow! Now, how do you select which of the 25 are going to be lucky?
It's down to, in a lot of cases, the event is sponsored. So in many cases, sponsors may get priority, but overall, it's just a lottery really, and or the best rafts will be chosen.
Now, in fundraising, do people just donate, or what do you do? Do you have people shaking cans?
There's a certain amount of bucket collections, and also there's an entry fee for the raft race itself. A good portion of that money goes to the actual operational costs of providing the safety provisions and so on. But obviously, whatever's left over will go to the local charity.
Right.
This year, we're also in partnership with New Haven Town Council, because they really wanted to get more involved, because obviously it finishes there. So this year we will be supporting a charity in Lewis and a charity in New Haven.
A lot of people line the banks. Do you take an estimate of how many people are here on a good Sunday?
We would estimate maybe 5,000 to 7,000, but with no way of telling really. But it seems to be a very popular event, and the people of the town are taking it to their hearts.
Yes, indeed they have. I mean, it's a wonderful occasion. After all the bloodshed and death in this little town, that regatta makes me feel a lot better. Time for a little nap, I think.
Well, for those people who are new to Lewis and not aware of our history, this series helps some of the highlights, anyway, that many do not know about. And that is a little history of surrounding the Ouse, the river which runs through the town, and historically a very important river. And today, although it's a leisure river as opposed to a trading river, or an industrial river, or a military river, gives a lot of pleasure to a lot of people, one way or another. Now, I'm expecting John Henty, but he hasn't turned up yet. But he's not very far away, and he's a real hustler and a bustler. So I rather think he'll come tearing up the road any minute now. But let me just add, because of the lockdown, the second documentary never got made. Maybe it will yet, because Mirador is beginning to flourish again. It's beginning to boom. It has its problems. It's well underfunded, but it's got a lot of very enthusiastic people who are contributing to putting it back on the map. And it's full of brimming, teeming with ideas. And so I am going to just add a couple of historical footnotes that would have been included in any part 2 or volume 2 of A Bloody Past of a Tiny Town. And the first one is Horatio Bottomley. You thought I was going to say Hornblower, didn't you? Well, I don't know that Hornblower had much to do with this town, except that I would suspect that, like Sir Francis Drake, he was a bowls player. And the bowls that were played in medieval times, Tudor times, and played in a lot of places since, are still played in Lewis. And they now believe that they're the only people in the country that play that form of bowls. And it's played on the tilting green the old tilting green attached to the castle, and has been there since 1870 something. Although it's believed that the bowls of this sort were played there long before that. Perhaps while it was still a tilting green, who knows? Of course, the tilting greens started to go into disuse after gunpowder was not invented, because the Chinese invented it as far as we know. But it was discovered, and people started to shoot one another instead of knock one another off their horses with lances and with swords. That is an important part of this town and this history. But Horatio was Horatio Bottomley was born into relative poverty. In fact, he was an orphan, and as often happened in Victorian times, he was raised by an aunt and an uncle, not because they loved him, but because they were paid to do so. And when the money ran out, he was dumped into an orphanage in the suburb of Birmingham called Erdington. I know Erdington is not the prettiest place in the world, but Horatio was thrown into this orphanage, which was a very strict one, even by those times. So he had a very severe upbringing. He left there and at 16, 17, and found work in a solicitor's office. Now, Horatio was anything but dumb. He was a very clever chap, even if he turned out to be a little bit of a crook. But more of that in a minute. Horatio learned all he could in the lawyer's office, and put it to good use in his early years, in his early 20s, when he founded a publishing empire. He recognized and managed to buy a printing works and started a newspaper. And two of those newspapers existed. One is in the 1960s, and the other is now perhaps, and you can see the defense of it by Stuart Dolby to this day, is perhaps considered to be, by many, the leading newspaper of the day, and that is the Financial Times. They were both started by Horatio and turned into very successful papers. He funded part of his eventual empire by selling shares in gold mines in Australia. I think possibly in Canada as well, but I'm not sure about that. But certainly in Australia, and made a fortune. But eventually, he was shouted down because it became obvious that the gold mines were not gold mines at all. And there were holes in the ground, which Horatio had persuaded people held a fortune in gold. And so Horatio managed to get investors, which he put into his publishing companies, and not have to pay any dividends, shut out anything on mine. So it was free money to all intents and purposes. So people expected to have it back. So he was viewed with some suspicion. But in his newspapers, he ran competitions. And people were invited to pay a certain amount each month on the basis that there would be much the same as today. And I always look at things that are on telly. This is a so and so lottery. Buy this, and you get £1,000 to be won every week, and £5,000 every month. And twice a year you get £50,000. It sounds very much like bottomry, because that's exactly what he did. Except that what he made sure was that his employees, or even he, would win the lottery, and he tucked it into his own bank account. Now with that, supported a tremendous lifestyle, where about 5 miles from here, in Upper Dicker, his mansion still exists, but not as a mansion. It exists as a school. It was called St. Bede's until recently, and now it's just Bede's. Let's see. It was a lavish mansion, and he threw fantastic parties. On top of that, he had stables built in which he had a chain of racehorses, and was a popular figure at some of the best racehorses. Now, along came a war, the First World War. By this time, Horatio had taken to civil society and a high lifestyle, and became an MP. The first time he ran, he was defeated, but he was a great critic of the government over its policy towards its enemies. And the second time he ran, he won hands down. He devastated his opposition. As a consequence, he was a very senior member of Parliament, and gave incredible speeches. And for somebody with very limited education, he became a very posh man, a very articulate man, and a very important man, because when it became obvious that Britain was going to go to war, he had a knack, and particularly through John Bull, his magazine, of recruiting people to go abroad. Long before they had any way of forcing enlistment. It was all done on patriotism, and whole villages and towns joined up almost as a unit. That's why so many villages and towns were devastated when it became obvious that this war was a very nasty war, and that people were losing their lives in groups. But he was a terrific recruiter, and the government loved him, but not enough to put him into the cabinet, which irked him enormously. But in the meantime, he continued to fleece. He sold war bonds and all sorts of things, until eventually, because some of the returns that he promised didn't transpire, people began to get wind of the fact all was not well. And so a couple accused Horatio of fiddling the books, as it were. Now, he might well have got away with it because his legal advisor said, just leave it, walk away from it, don't get involved, don't go into court. But Horatio knew better, and he decided that he would defend his reputation by suing those who were accusing him of wrongdoing. And it was a mistake, because in court it became obvious that he was doing what they said that he was doing. He was fiddling the books, both with his newspapers, with his gold mines, and with anything else that he could lay his hands on. And so, because he was charged and going to court, he was first told to resign from Parliament. That was the first thing that he lost. But despite the fact that he was a swindler, the Speaker of the day said, we will miss your delightful speeches, your wonderful sense of humor, your wonderful turn of phrase. That was the Speaker of the House of Commons about this man who'd been charged with being a swindler. But he got worse and worse until in the end he was found guilty and was sent away for 7 years. And his empire crashed. He'd had a railway station built. It must have been somewhere near, let's see, excuse me, somewhere near Plumpton or Cooksbridge, so that his guests could both join him for racing and come to his lavish parties. You got on a train, onto Horatio's train, and you went and you stayed at his house, and you went to his wonderful parties. They must have been quite something. But it all came to an end, and he went into prison. The other thing that he was not... he lost sympathy as he treated his wife rather badly, and he had a long-time mistress who was an actress and who actually stayed with him throughout this bad period. When he came out of prison, he tried to resurrect his empire, and when that became obvious that this time around, A, times had changed, and B, his silver tongue was very suspect, and so didn't get people to release their money quite the way it had. He went onto the music hall stage to tell his tales, his colourful tales, and they intrigued everybody. Absolutely intrigued everybody, that they wouldn't pay the tuppence to go and see him. And so he ended his days in relative poverty with only his actress mistress left, giving him the total support that he'd been used to in his heyday. So rags to riches, and then back to rags again. And that was Horatio Bottomley, who lived, played, made his fortune only 5 miles from Lewis. Only 5 miles from where we're sitting now, and in a pretty little village, which is still a pretty little village. Upper is a charming place, And just as a side issue, is the well preserved. Horatio's empire was well preserved. His mansion is still a very, very good building for the school, for Bede School. As a side issue, another well preserved building complex, in fact, is Mickleham Priory, which was an Augustine, I believe, priory, which was started sometime around 1200. But it had as its denizens some naughty monks, singing, dancing, and wench chasing monks. It is said that at the gates to the priory in its early days was a pub, and that the monks spent more time in the pub than they did in the priory. And that's where I think that some of the songs for the Carmina Burana or the classical Karl Orff music of drunken medieval monk songs it came from. The monks on several occasions the Roman Church sent investigative parties to take a look because they weren't satisfied that the monks were doing exactly what they should be doing as a religious body. And in fact, the burghers of Upper Dicker were outraged because their daughters were at risk from the bunch of people that they got in there. They never let up, and eventually the priory was closed down, and it was bought by I think one of the famous families around here, and I've forgotten just the name of them now. And that's my memory, because I hadn't planned to really talk about this morning. But the family were a very, very well-known Elizabethan family. In fact, related to Queen Elizabeth, and they also led a pretty fair life, and managed to escape the clutches and have the priory, which by this time turned into a manor house, saved it from destruction from Henry VIII, the dissolution of the monasteries. And it has stayed in, I think it's the Neville family. I think it was the Nevilles. And it stayed in their hands up until just sometime in the last century. But they now it is owned, I think, by the state, or by a council, and or a trust, and is opened up to visitors. And one of the Nevilles who lived there was as naughty as the monks, and is said to have terrorized the female staff and pinched their bottoms. And it is said that his ghost strides the halls of Mickleham Priory, pinching visitors' bottoms. And actually, I must say, I've been there, and I can swear that my bum was pinched. And I looked around, and there was nobody there, just me. It's I have to believe it. It must be true. It's happened to me. But Mickleham Priory it's got a working water mill. The house, formerly the Priory, is beautiful both inside and outside. It's Upper Dicker has a lovely pub. It has a nice little shop. It is a typical rural English village. And it is full of history from, I think, pre-Tudor times to John has arrived. I'm going to go and let him in. Pre-Tudor times until now. So let's just Well, here we are back again, and he's here. He's here, wrapped up in his Louis. Yes, yes. That is the rooks.
The rooks.
Who have done extremely well as far as the ladies are concerned.
The ladies are doing well. Yes, they're not doing too badly. They're still fighting at the moment.
Yeah.
A bit of relegation, I'm afraid.
Oh, is there?
Yes.
Because they were in the cup final 2 years ago.
Ah, what, the ladies were?
Yeah.
Good gracious me.
Incredible.
Ah,
Incredible.
oh,
Well, I've just told you about
yes.
Horatio Bottomley,
Oh,
and
yes.
now the equivalent in the media world
Yes.
is John Henty. And where are you off to, John, next
Yes.
today?
Well, it's a long story, and I'm sorry if I appear rather late, but there are pressures, you know, we all understand this, when you're in the media, of course, and under so much sort of demand from a whole range of different sources. I mean, it's how long have we got? No, I mean, the answer to all of that is that I'm here now. That's the most important thing. And I'm here with some, I regard, rather important news, regardless of what I shall be doing later today, which is hardly crucial, but we'll go to it if we ask.
Ah, but fascinating.
Well, it is fascinating, I suppose, in a way. But you see, on my way here, I diverted briefly to buy a local newspaper. I have a great respect for the local newspaper, which is the Argus. Those of you will know that, I'm sure. And I've been a follower of the Argus for many years.
Did you work for the Argus at all?
No, I never actually worked for the Argus. I've had the occasional letter in the Argus and the occasional court case featuring me, of course. Not guilty, Your Worship. But other than that, no. But I've known people on the Argus. My great friend was Adam Trimingham, who was a #1 reporter there. And occasionally, I believe he is aware of Mirador, as most of the universe is. But Adam is there, living in Hove, actually, so he's still around. And funnily enough, the editor, his name is Henty, actually, Hendy.
Nice.
He's a young whippersnapper, but he's pretty sharp. And today, the Argus is carrying a story which is good news for Max Miller fans. You see, we celebrate Max Miller here as frequently as we can.
Hey, Max, go Max.
Go Max,
Go
exactly.
Max.
And today, equally, we'll be saying hip, hip, hooray. Because here is the headline, and I bring it to you. You may not have seen this. Not so many people are out as early as I am, madam. And here are the headlines today. Can you see that?
Hippodrome plans approved.
Absolutely. Hippodrome plans approval. Now, what does that mean? We're talking about the Brighton Hippodrome,
Right.
which was a magnificent theatre with a wonderful dome and amphitheatre and rooms and an area at the back even for elephants. It used to be a circus area as well in the early days. And for the last 4 years, an organisation called Maxim Properties in Brighton, a couple of local men who I met, and they put forward a proposal for changing in some ways the basic structure of the theatre, probably to meet needs today in the year 2024, but also to remember that it was a magnificent theatre. Now, we were all a little worried because they spent a lot of money renovating and stopping all the rain coming in at that time. And we were very concerned that nothing was going to happen and it would end the way of the West Pier and crumble into the sea. And therefore, when we discovered earlier this week that the Brighton and Hove Planning Committee was meeting yesterday, Wednesday, to actually either approve or turn down Maxim's plans, we waited with bated breath. And such is the miracle of modern technology today that I was first alerted to the good news, would you believe this, by a friend of mine who lives in Sri Lanka. I mean, you see, so don't sniff at Mirador, madam, because there are people probably at this very moment watching us in Sri Lanka. And that was the former Ceylon, just in case you wonder, it's the former Ceylon. Now, that was amazing, and I got in touch with this lovely bloke called Jerry and his friend Walter. And I said, good grief, Jerry, have you got long-range binoculars? He thought that was quite funny, actually. And they said, no. And listen to this. And I feel thoroughly ashamed. I should have known this as a communications man myself. He said, no, we watched the actual council meeting live. In other words, the planning committee was live on the whatever.
Oh, Brighton, much more
Yeah.
enlightened than the council here, which isn't here at all, anyways, in
Good,
Eastbourne.
great. They don't allow cameras in. They don't allow human beings in there. No. Shouldn't.
I don't think any of them can speak.
Oh, well, that's the whole point. Now, the worrying thing was that there has been opposition to the plans. People have said, oh, we don't want that there, and you can't have a bit of a restaurant there, and you can't, we thought, oh dear. And the Theatre Trust, which is not based in Brighton, they wanted it returned. We've discussed this as it was before. And you and I have agreed that that was not practicable, simply because the world has changed and people now don't come to Brighton for an entire couple of weeks. They come for a couple of hours or maybe a couple of days, but they don't stay, and they're not looking for entertainment every night. So we thought that it might be rejected on the grounds of the Theatres Trust. No, apparently not. A member of our society, the Max Miller Appreciation Society, deserves a mention here because fortunately she is a councillor in the Brighton area, and she was very much in favour of this, and we like to believe that it was thanks to Carol Theobald and her husband, both of them, for supporting us with this and getting it passed. And there's the headlines: the plans are approved. Delight as council gives plans for transformation to go ahead.
There were some Theobalds in Lewis.
Really? Yeah.
Is it the same Theobald?
I would well imagine it is.
His first name is Geoffrey, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
That's right, yeah.
Geoffrey Theobald.
Wow,
and
well
Carol
done.
Theobald.
Well done.
Charming people, frequently attend our Max Miller Appreciation Society dinners and functions wherever they are. A great supporter, and I know Carol has a mum who is 100 years of age.
Wow.
And comes to some of our garden parties as
well.
Right.
Now, explain exactly where the Hippodrome is.
Well, the Hippodrome actually is in the Lanes area, if you're familiar with Brighton. There's one road called Ship Street. That is the back of the Hippodrome. And then there is another road parallel with Ship Street, and that is where you get the frontage of the Hippodrome. Right. It's a massive frontage, and it is in a splendid position for nightlife, for eating, all the good things that Brighton can offer and does.
Well, thank goodness the council is doing something right.
Oh, totally right. I mean, that genuinely I know we're in Lewis, but that is good news. It's good news for everybody.
Yes, for the region. Yes.
And above all else, you might say, well, what the hell's this got to do with Max Miller? The answer is, and we have said this before, I think you probably know this, that Max Miller appeared at that theatre more times than any other performer. And whilst others like the Rolling Stones, like Laurel and Hardy, like all the big names in entertainment, they appeared there as well, week in and week out. But they didn't live in Brighton. They didn't die in Brighton. Yeah. They were not Brighton, and Max Miller was Brighton. So that's why this is important, and why, end of this conversation.
Right. Max Miller is more important than perhaps people whose names are better known. But not that many are better known than Max Miller, but he lived, he was one of ours.
Absolutely.
One of ours.
Totally right. And he reflected everything that is Brighton then and is Brighton today for a whole range of reasons. Therefore, he's relevant. Therefore, our next step as a committee, we must get together. We must meet these planning people if we have that opportunity. Certainly get in touch yet again with Maxim Properties. And we will be saying, well, when things do develop, we would like to be part of that in some small way. And our basic idea would be to have a celebration, a modest celebration, everything Max Miller with all the wonderful objects that we've got, and to have that within the building somewhere, and possibly call it, because many of his jokes were regarded as blue, which they weren't, madam, but they were slightly rude, shall we say. We suggest that there should be perhaps a blue room.
Oh, yes, what a good idea.
A blue. Exactly.
Oh, I like that, yes.
You heard it first here on Mirador. Don't tell me we don't have exclusive here. Oh, you'll hear it later today, but not straight from the horse's mouth. So there we are. That's why I'm slightly elated today, because it's been a long wait, And as you say, with council matters, you never know which way it's going to go.
Never know.
And we had a great fear that it would be rejected again and then plummet into the sea like the West Pier.
How sad.
It would be terribly sad.
Yes.
So that is good news.
It is.
And the other news, I suppose, I think I should mention the reason I'm belting into Brighton in a few minutes' time is because I've been approached. I mentioned last week. It didn't surprise you, of course.
No,
I've been approached by several sources, BBC sources, a whole range of people, actually. He joked. Simply because on this occasion, on April the 6th in 1974, which is 50 years ago, by the way, madam, that lady in Poynings was working it out 50 years ago. I was there in the audience with 800, 900 other people to see ABBA win the Eurovision Song Contest with Waterloo. So we could say that when I board that bus in about 10, 15, 20 minutes time, I will be going to meet my
Waterloo. Yes.
Yes. I think their version was better, actually.
Yes.
And they
knew the words.
And they were prettier as well. Well, two of them were.
Oh, yes.
All of them were.
Was it Agneta, was it?
What?
Was it Agneta? One of them?
Oh, what? That's right.
Yes,
Oh,
yes. I was in love with her.
it wasn't just, well, I'm not surprised. It wasn't just the song, of course, though. It was the tremendous dynamic. It was a breakthrough. And I'm bound to be asked this, did we realize? Not entirely. No, there were other acts as well, very good ones. But somehow they shone through and in the end were the winners and then went on to worldwide fame and recognition and now available digitally, that you name it, you can see ABBA everywhere, which is good news. And I'm just simply going there to say what sort of an evening it was. I'm going to meet an old chum of mine, funnily enough. Radio Brighton was there at the time when I worked at Radio Brighton. And my good friend Stuart McIntosh, who was one of the presenters at BBC Radio Brighton / Sussex, he, I'm told, is going to be there as well. So it'll be a little bit of a reunion for me. With
Wonderful. Is he being interviewed as well?
I would imagine you try and keep him down. No, we all like being interviewed, don't we? He said. and Stuart actually is still, whilst I'm doing this wonderful prime time, I shall tell Stuart all about Mirador, of course. Because he can brag that he's still working, and so am I, madam. You don't retire, you see. We've been down that road. You don't retire. It's nonsense. And in point of fact, Stuart is still working, to the best of my knowledge, for the BBC on the World Service. Which,
oh, really? Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes, he had a rather, well, in the early days, he was freelance. A lot of people joined Radio Brighton in the early days, did whatever they could around the building, probably got paid no money at all. But they learned radio and they were involved in programs outside broadcast. Yes. Stuart was one of those.
That's how you became professional in those days.
Oh, yes. Entirely right. Learned on the job, as they called it.
Yes.
And above all else, today there's this mad obsession with money, but the young people then, including Desmond Lynham, I've mentioned him several times, Lynham was perfectly happy to go to cover football matches, spend the entire afternoon possibly at some obscure ground somewhere, or maybe at the Goldstone ground. And Des would be very lucky if he got a tenner.
And
if he got
10, the byword in football reporting.
Yes, a top man, and there were many of them. There was a lovely man called Jack Arledge, and there's a bus going past there. I hope in time they will have the innovation on it in Mirador is splendid, because quite rightly we did discuss this and you said, yes, there we are. That's going on at this very moment, I point of fact. Cars going past, there is life out there, there are people going past, and they are human beings.
Yes.
So if you think we're doing this in a vacuum, we're not. No.
Yes.
We're in the Black Horse pub.
And now look.
The bonus today is, as I heard someone say, is it a bonus? I'm not so sure. You can actually hear what we're saying as well. What more could you ask for? Images, there we are, images, there's the view, and there's a little turning off there. I was watching it, I think on Monday, and I noticed a number of vehicles going in. And of course, that's the home of East Sussex County Council, I believe.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. So they were all going to work at
In
about
fact, you can just see the council building there up to the right. Yes.
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, how can you not watch Mirador television? It baffles me. Tell your friends about it as well. So that's the good news that ABBA tonight, and BBC Radio Sussex, we'll be doing a little piece, I think, live at about midday, so that might be fun. And then tonight, I had another phone call. These BBC people are lovely now. This man said, "Oh, hello, John Henty." I said, "Yes, John Henty." He said, "Oh, well, one of our producers," he said. I said, "In my time, we didn't even have any producers." I said, "What do you mean one of our producers?" He said, "Well, they may be in touch, because we're doing." I said, "I know what you're doing," he said. And he said, "Well, you go." I said, "I'm going to be there." Yes. He said, "Well, would you?" I said, "Yes, I will." I knew exactly what he was going to say, you see. And so that's apparently the people in Tunbridge Wells. I mentioned Mirador to them, by the way. I did. When he said we were doing a little item live into BBC Southeast tonight at 6:30, I said, "Oh, well," I said, "I'm sorry, but I shall be ahead of you because I'm on Mirador at about 9:30. He said, "What?" I said, "Oh," he said, "Oh, are you?" He said, "Oh, dear, that's going to ruin our audience then," he said. And I thought, yes, right. All those people in Tunbridge Wells who normally tune into this, I mean, there'll be... Anyway, so that's at 6:30 tonight as well. And I tell you what, as I said frequently, don't blink because you'll miss it. I promise you. Another bus. I've got to get a bus. I told this BBC man. I said, "Well, I will come in." I said, "My bus," and he sort of went, "Bus? Aren't you having transport?" I said, "No, not unless you provide me with a car." Well, no, we can't.
It's only because of the cuts. Otherwise, they would have sent a limousine for you.
Oh, well, now that would have been rather good and very, very ABBA, if I may say. One of those. Do you remember that last week we had this?
Yes, we had a limousine go by.
It was. I mean, it was a sort of wedding, and I mean, I could have sat. You could have come as well. And we could have done a sort of an outside broadcast.
We could.
So all the excitement. We're lovely to see you. We both got these silly hats on. I noticed your hat this morning.
Yes. Well, it's because my blue trilby blows off when it's a stiff breeze.
Oh, don't.
There's a stiff breeze.
Stiff breeze. I mean, that's one word for it. I mean, I did debate. I was thinking, shall I? What's your view? What's your view, viewers? Do you think I should wear this hat when I appear on BBC? I think so.
I think so, absolutely.
I mean, I know it's very old.
Very Henty.
So am I, absolutely. Yes. So,
what have you got in the bag this morning?
Well, I've only got one little. I've got the little mention of ABBA, which I think we've already seen. So that is, I've covered it up rather because it's rather precious. But that's the actual program for the contest on
Euro Song Contest
50 years ago.
Wow,
that is the actual program. And
wonderful.
Also in the front there, a couple of tickets. They were for the Stalls Circle, and that's where I was sitting together with my lovely wife, Sylvia. And as I joked again, I don't think the fellow at the BBC didn't have a sense of humour, unfortunately. So he obviously doesn't know me. So when I said, in point of fact, I shall be back there probably later in the year, I said, because they're going to unveil a plaque very near to the seat where I actually sat in the Dome restaurant or wherever it was. And I really think he believed that they were going to do that. John Henty sat here watching the Eurovision Song Contest. Dear Lord, and so did a lot of other people.
Good. Let's keep the myth going.
Absolutely. You know, who knows? I may even meet that wonderful person you mentioned.
Yes.
Yes. I think
that was the lady I was in.
Oh, yes, right.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
There we are, folks. Can you see that? Yes.
Wonderful.
There they are. They're actually at the Dome or the Pavilion grounds on that occasion. So I'm taking that with me just in case anybody's interested. I'm also going to take the Argus. And the other item I brought, which I thought might be worth a mention, last week we were talking about, this dreadful weather and the difficulties we all face, that you face, we know the difficulties that everybody who's watching this probably faces from time to time, including the weather. And I said, well, my coat of arms, I said, sums it all up, you see.
Yes.
Which might explain, people were surprised that I even have a coat of arms, but we do. And the Henty family, I brought it with me today. It's not a blooming great shield, but it's very small. Here it is. There it is. That is the Henty coat of arms.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, and it says underneath it, per ardua stabilis, which is not per ardua ad astra, which is the Royal Air Force, of course. This is per ardua stabilis, which I'm given to understand by Latin scholars that it means steady in difficulties. And I thought, how appropriate.
Absolutely.
Isn't that perhaps everybody should have one of these? And
They should.
we could sell them.
Well, we should get one done at the college arms, coat of arms,
Yes,
college,
absolutely.
for Mirador, shouldn't we?
That would be a brilliant idea.
Yes.
It may not
A little turret.
It may not surprise you to know, with your knowledge of world affairs and Ireland in particular, that this was actually a product of a company in, I think, Ireland as opposed to Northern Ireland.
Really, in the Republic of Ireland.
They offered these, and I have a strong suspicion that they sort of made it up as they went along. I wouldn't know, of course. And am I bothered? No, I'm not bothered. But there we are.
Absolutely not.
What?
Is it if somebody believes it and researches it and it's Henty? It's a Henty coat of arms.
Well, it is, and that is perfectly to.
I'll tell you what we should do.
Go on.
We should actually get a horse and go down to the tilting ground, which is now the bowling green.
Good idea.
And sit you on it and ride you across it.
I could organise that, yes. The last time I was on a horse of any sort was in Kennards of Croydon, and it was a horse. Sadly, I mean, I don't like to tell this story, actually, but as a child, I was on this horse, and it was on a sort of a round, and it went round and round and round, and that was very sad.
Oh,
This was rides in a store in Croydon, and for kiddywinkies, and these were real ponies. I suppose
that was a long time ago.
It was a very long time, very, very long.
I mean, it's been a long time since they've had donkeys on Brighton Beach, isn't it?
It is, although I gather if you go to Blackpool,
they still got them there?
I believe they still have people take them down and going through the streets, which is lovely, much to the pleasure of the gardeners, of course. And I mean, that was quintessentially the seaside, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
A donkey ride.
Yes. Can I do a little red herring?
Yes, go on.
Because did you know that when the king now sends a carriage to pick up an ambassador to go and get his recognition at the court of St. James, is that they have to provide, when the carriage gets there, they have to provide 2 carrots for the
No.
Yes.
What, royal carrots? What do you see again? That gentleman in Wittering, yes, one of our favourite viewers. Now, you didn't know that, did you, sir?
No.
The royal family, or the king in particular, or queen earlier, of course, provide carrots for the. Oh, well, that's quite a nice story. I'm not surprised.
It's a nice tradition too.
Oh, it's lovely. I mean, the queen obviously loved horses, didn't
Yes, she did. She did.
And I wonder whether, I'm not sure Charles quite shares that.
No, he doesn't. It's not the same. Or his father, actually. His father loved horses as well.
He did.
He drove coach and four, didn't he?
Very often here in Brighton.
Absolutely. In fact, it probably was only just before the Prince Regent drove the coach and four down Keir Street.
Yes. Do you think that actually happened?
Well, there is some doubt, but the man who was his advisor and his pal, Baron Larde, was a horseman, and not only that, but his wife was the mistress at one stage of a highwayman. Yes.
A highwayman?
Yes.
What a story. Has this featured? I should know. Have you featured this on Mirador?
No, but I think I should. Yes,
that's a good story.
I should add Larde to, I don't know if it's pronounced Larde, it's Lade anyway. Oh. And he lived on Lewis High Street.
Good gracious me. Well, people may not know this, but Keir Street is a narrow street. I lived in Keir Street for a short while.
Yes, you did. You had that lovely house. Yeah.
And it's got cobbles and everything, which can't have been much horse. Surely it would have been cobbled then.
Well, it's the whole thing about being dead to write it down. The chances are he could have broken his neck, and the whole of English history would have been.
Well, yes, it would.
Yes. The other story about Lardy is that he dared. He had a bet with Lord Cholmondeley that he could carry him around Old Steam.
Yes.
And when Cholmondeley turned up, he said, "Strip." And Cholmondeley said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I said I would carry you around, not you and your clothes."
Oh.
And won the bet. Cholmondeley was not prepared to strip.
I tell you what I like about that story. I like the name Cholmondeley.
Yes.
Cholmondeley. How often do you meet people called Cholmondeley? And how do you spell it? It's not easy to spell Cholmondeley, let me tell you. Well, then, what fascinating history. We've talked about something that's happening ahead, of course, with the Hippodrome in Brighton. We're talking about something that happened 50 years ago in Brighton on April the 6th in 1974, the Eurovision Song Contest. And then there is going to be a special programme about that on BBC Two television, and that is on Saturday night at 9:35.
The nice thing about this morning is we've gone through, including the Henty coat of arms, lots of things which we can pick up on this time next week.
Oh, absolutely. We shall be here. Let me look at the time. I've got to. Oh, yes, that's all right. I mean, I daren't be late for the BBC.
Absolutely not. Not only that, but we've also got Philip Meredith and from Normandy, Harry Atherton, waiting in the wings to come on and keep up the repartee. They're both very funny people.
Well, I apologise if I've ruined the schedules today, but it's all good. It has to be good. Greetings to everybody. Let's hope there's a bus. Have you seen one go past? Not recently. So I better go get me bus, and we'll talk about it next week.
Absolutely. And the nice thing about today's program is it shows why Mirador supports Dad's army.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. They can't they don't like it up them. So,
the Eldons are the best of us.
Oh, dear. Bye, everybody. Cheerio, John. Oh, dear.
Wonderful stuff, John, as usual, and enjoy your day in the sun, as it were.
Get off.
Here we go.
Go get run over,
we must give the black horse its little moment. So, Toodle Pip. From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub. Stand by for Phil and Harry.